Good afternoon. My name is Trish Carter, and it is my privilege and honor to serve Cedarfield as a chaplain. The program we have today is one of many in the name of RVA, Spiritual Voices. It is such an honor to be able to introduce to you today Rabbi Don Cantor, who is the director of the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience, which provides Jewish learning opportunities for people of all ages and all backgrounds throughout the Richmond area. He was born and raised right here in Richmond. He has traveled as far as Israel to receive a degree and also received a degree as close as VCU. He previously taught Talmud at Yeshiva of Virginia Boys School and most recently served as a rabbi at Johns Hopkins University. Still, none of his illustrious achievements can top his grandmother's statement about him that he is, and I quote, a good kid. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Don Cantor.
Thanks, Grandma. I'm really excited to be here. My grandmother being in the crowd is definitely doesn't hurt that. I'm told that my grandmother likes to talk about her family. But what you don't know is that when she's with her family, she talks all about Cedarfield. So let me see if I can. Does this work? Oh. Is this better? No? How about now? Can you hear it? Okay. Let's see. The slides just went out. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Can you hear me? I've also been instructed to speak directly into the microphone, and I hope that I can count on you to yell at me if I am not doing that. It's better to be, it's better to be told off once than for you to go through the whole this whole presentation without hearing what I'm saying. Okay, so unless I am mistaken, I am here to talk about the holidays that are coming up on the Jewish calendar. These are holidays that happen every year in the fall, or at more or less. Sometime in September or October is usually when these holidays come out. The reason why the holidays are not always on the same date is because they go according to the Jewish calendar, which is a lunar calendar. So the regular calendar that we use is pegged to the sun, is the solar calendar, with 365 and give or take a quarter days every year. The Jewish calendar has 354 days a year, and so we need a lot more leap years and things like that in order to keep up and make sure that our holidays always fall in more or less in the same season. But while they maintain they all fall pretty much in the same time of the year. They're not in the same date on the English calendar every year. But what we're going to talk about is the Jewish fall holidays. And they are Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. We'll go through each holiday on its own, and we'll talk about it. And then hopefully at the end we will we'll summarize and maybe look at them all together again as one group and what kind of meaning Jews might take from this whole slew of holidays that really all take place within about a 3-week period on the Jewish calendar. We'll talk about how they're celebrated and why they are celebrated in the fall. Okay. The first holiday that we have is the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and often associated with apples and honey. And Rosh Hashanah is a day when, according to Jewish tradition, God begins the process of judging the world to determine what the next year will bring. The liturgy that we say that for the prayers on Rosh Hashanah that we when we go to synagogue, place a special emphasis on recognizing God as the one, not only the judge, but the ruler of the world as well, that God as king. One big feature of Rosh Hashanah, and definitely of the service, of the prayer service that takes place on Rosh Hashanah, is the shofar, which is usually a ram's horn, although other horns can be used. A popular one, if I can skip forward a second, is the kudu, a great kudu horn, which is longer, twistier, and looks cooler. But there are a couple of reasons why we sound the ram's horn. So, like it says up there, throughout the service, there are about 100 blasts of the ram's horn that can be heard, and it's like we said just a minute ago, when we're talking about God as the king or as some sort of ruler of the world, horns historically have been blown. Trumpets are blown as well to herald the arrival of a king or someone important. The ram's horn is also associated with the binding of Isaac. So that's the story in the Bible where Abraham is told by God first to bring his son Isaac. Seems to be as a sacrifice. Sounds pretty cruel, and it's not quite understood. But Abraham, in his commitment to God, is going to do whatever God says. And just as he is about to sacrifice his son, God sends an angel and tells Abraham, "No, don't do that. We don't actually believe in child sacrifice. Really not a good idea." And instead, Abraham offers a ram to God, and so this story is alluded to in the liturgy, in Jewish liturgy on Rosh Hashanah on the New Year as well, and it's supposed to remind us of what our commitment to God is supposed to be, how committed we're supposed to be, and maybe also to remind God that we have a history of being pretty committed, and maybe to judge us a little more favorably. And so that's the shofar. There are also, of course, it's a Jewish holiday, so there are foods. So like we mentioned, we eat apples and honey. That is an Ashkenazic tradition. The Ashkenazic Jews are the ones who come from Europe originally, as opposed to the Sephardic Jews who come from Spain and Africa. So we eat apples and honey because the foods that are associated traditionally with Rosh Hashanah are foods that reflect what we reflect the theme of the holiday, which is that this is the new year. We're hoping for a sweet new year and a nice new year, so that's why we have apples and honey. I know I can understand honey. Apples go really nicely with honey. I'm not really sure where the apples come from, but I'm not complaining. Pomegranates are also a common food because they have lots and lots of seeds, and this is the expression of our hope that we will be able to do lots and lots of good things over the course of the year. And we also, one thing that I think is kind of funny is there are lots of food puns that people make. So we know that in terms of a couple thousand years, really 3,500 years of Jewish history, there's been a Jewish community in the United States for 400 years, and it really hasn't gotten to be so that the community in the United States hadn't really been robust until the last maybe 100 or so years, and so there haven't been a ton of English food puns that have developed for the Rosh Hashanah service. Although there are some tongue-in-cheek ones. For example, people like to have celery and raisins, so maybe the next year they'll have a raisin celery. But it's groany things like that. I'll tell you that my mother-in-law her family comes from Tunisia, and when we have a Rosh Hashanah meal together with my in-laws, she has a whole very old brown packet of all these different Arabic and Hebrew food puns that have something to do with us having a nice year, maybe doing what we want to our enemies or things like that. But that's what we have so the Rosh Hashanah it's interesting because it's a serious day because it's a day where we of introspection, where we begin thinking about where we do think about God judging us, and so we're taking it seriously, but apparently not too seriously. because it can never be too serious for puns. All right, that's Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later is the Yom Kippur. That is the Day of Atonement. And Yom Kippur is viewed also as the culmination of this process, of this judging process by God, and of our process of introspection that we set time once a year to make sure that we take stock of our lives and how we've been and maybe how we can improve. And so this day, this process culminates on the day of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And on Yom Kippur, we ask God for forgiveness for all the things that we've done. Am I still speaking okay? Everyone can hear. We ask God for forgiveness for all the things we may not have done so nicely in the last year. And this is it's very interesting if we think about it. We could talk about it a little bit more later, maybe, but there's the fact that we set time every year on the calendar. And these are really holidays that originate in the Bible. So we believe that it was that God set time in our calendar every year because He understands that we're human beings and we screw up, and that's just part of life. And the most important thing we can do about that is try to improve. And so that culminates on Yom Kippur, which is a little bit different. Whereas Rosh Hashanah, we're all about the food. On Yom Kippur, we don't eat food. And so the full Yom Kippur fast lasts 25 hours, and so that's no food or drink. And we also don't wear leather shoes or also preferably not shoes with thick soles. That it's supposed to be a day that the Bible describes as, to a certain extent, we afflict ourselves, that we don't indulge in more physical luxuries, like food or nice shoes. Another thing that I find to be very interesting is that we typically don't wear gold jewelry. And the reason why we refrain from wearing gold and jewelry is because the first big mistake that the Jewish people make in the Bible is the sin of the golden calf at Mount Sinai. And so on a day where we are thinking about how to improve ourselves, we don't want to try to use the same material that we used to participate in the first really bad thing that we did on a day where we're trying to erase those kinds of things. So that's another way in which we're taking the day seriously, and more than just food or prayer, in which there is a lot of that on Yom Kippur. The services vary in terms of their length across synagogues and denominations, but definitely the longest service of the year is going to be on Yom Kippur. After high school, I spent 2 years studying in a yeshiva in Israel, and it was really wonderful. I was in the Judean hills, and it was beautiful, and it was a really nice time, and I got to brush up on my Hebrew quite a bit. And on the day of Yom Kippur, so there was the services at night lasted a couple hours, and then starting on the day of Yom Kippur, we woke up. Services started at 6 in the morning, and we had about a 30-minute break in the afternoon, and they finished around 7 in the evening. And it was very long, but there's a lot of singing, while I typically am not really one for super long services, especially not ones that can last 13 hours. But for me, it was a nice experience just to be in a room full of 500 people, and everyone's together thinking about the same things, and trying to be better. That's something that was really special. Okay, so that's Yom Kippur. Next we have, Sukkot. What you see in this picture over here, this is a picture from Jerusalem, and you see these kind of little huts with weird roofs on top. Each one of those is a sukkah, or a sukkah, and in Hebrew, the plural of sukkah is Sukkot. And that is the holiday that might be known otherwise as Tabernacles. And this holiday of Sukkot is a 7-day holiday during which the Jews eat and sometimes sleep in a sukkah, in this booth. And the biblical reason given for this holiday is that we have to remember how God took care of us in the desert. And so when God took care of us in the desert, it was a bit of a trust exercise that the desert is not really a place that is cut out or made for human flourishing or even survival. And the fact that we were in such an environment and we trusted in God to care for us is something that wasn't just supposed to be a lesson for the 40 years that the Jews forgot their maps in the desert, but also a lesson for all time that we should trust in God. And so we go into these flimsy things that are by definition supposed to be flimsy to remind ourselves of the way in which we're supposed to have faith and maybe relax a little, let go a little bit, try to remind ourselves that as much as we want to be in control, we can never really be fully in control, and that's okay. Okay, so a sukkah here, that's a picture of when I was a rabbi at Johns Hopkins. The students and I put up that sukkah in the middle of campus. And a sukkah has at least 3 walls, and the main part is that the roof is made from unprocessed material that grows from the ground. So in the previous ones, you could see in this picture over here, those are date palm branches, and the one in the foreground, the one that's right next to that, has a little bamboo mat that's over there, and that's the same thing you can find in that one. Those are also bamboo mats over there. But you can see, it's nice if you have a leafy one, although if you have a leafy one and the leaves start falling off because the holiday lasts a week, maybe it's not as good, but that's what we're doing. Another ritual of Sukkot is the waving of the 4 species, and this reflects the Sukkot theme as an agricultural holiday, which we're thanking God for the harvest. This is the end of the Israeli agricultural cycle, which is something which we're going to talk about in just a minute. And these the 4 species are that are, you can kind of see them a little bit over here, but you have the longer, thinner leaves are branches of willow. Those shorter, maybe lighter green leaves are myrtle branches. The longer branch over there is a date palm branch, and those lumpy lemons are citrons, or in Hebrew called etrogim. So that's an etrog. They look like lumpy lemons. I think they look pretty, but lumpy lemon isn't a very dignified way of describing it. But I don't know what's a better one. Okay. That, I think, for me, is the boring stuff. All right? So now you have a basic idea of what's going on for 3 weeks on the Jewish calendar. Is we have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are these days that are associated with the new year, and along with a new year comes judgment or introspection and trying to figure out how we can have a good one, and maybe God is going to determine how good our year is going to be. And then right after that, Yom Kippur, so you have Rosh Hashanah is the beginning, is New Year's. 10 days later is Yom Kippur. 5 days after that is the 7-day holiday of Sukkot. Okay? And so that's what's going on. And you have some of the rituals, and so now maybe if someone gives you a pop quiz, you might be able to fill out a multiple choice questions about the trivia of these holidays. But for me, the more interesting thing about these holidays comes along with their agricultural significance. And this is just a nice picture of the Jezreel Valley in Israel, which is one of the most fertile areas in Israel. And this is the interesting thing about Jewish holidays. The Jewish holidays, as much as they might have biblical or historical significance about the Jews being in the desert, or Passover being about how God took the Jews out of Egypt, they also have agricultural significance. The Jewish calendar is completely scheduled around the agricultural cycle as it falls out in Israel. And it's very different than the one in the United States. So in the United States, especially on the East Coast and in the Northeast, it rains pretty much throughout the entire year. You know, in the summers we have more thunderstorms and hurricanes, and we might get snow and just regular rain in the fall and the winter, but it pretty much rains throughout the entire year. In Israel, that's not the case. In Israel, it rains only in the fall and the spring, and in the summer. It's really the winter and the spring. But in the summer and in most of the fall, there's not a cloud in the sky. So there's really only one planting season in Israel, which makes a big difference, right? So we can plant crops all year round in the United States and grow them. In Israel, they only have basically the winter for that they can really grow crops, and the spring the crops are starting to be ready, and so throughout the spring and the summer is the harvest. And so these holidays that fall at the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall are have real agricultural significance, because in what way is it a new year? It's a new year because it is the turning over of the agricultural cycle. It's the end of one cycle that we finish the harvest, and it's the renewal of the new cycle, when we begin to start planting and thinking about rain and how much we're going to get. Because another important thing to understand about Israel is that Israel does not really have natural water sources. Israel relies entirely on rain. There's one river that kind of goes down the eastern side, the Jordan River, but other than that, there's not really much in the way of natural water sources. So if it doesn't rain, it's a big deal. And this is a way which actually the Bible discusses that the Jews have a way to connect to God, because even now we are not really in charge of the weather, and we don't really have control over whether it's going to rain. And so in this way, we are completely at God's whim, and in this way, we're utterly reliant on God for rain and for the basics that we need to subsist. And that's what it's like for the Jewish people as they're living in the land of Israel. And so all of these holidays are pegged to the agricultural cycle to make sure that the Jewish people don't forget about God. Because if you think about it, especially a couple of thousand years ago, in an agrarian society, lots of people are farmers, and you put a lot of work into your crops, and it's very possible at the end of a successful harvest to be proud, and you should be proud of all this work that you put in to your crops, and making sure that you can feed yourselves and your families, and maybe sell some food to other people. And the one thing that the Bible warns about over and over and over again is how easy it is to forget about God when you're doing well. Right? We all know the phrase, "There's no atheist in a foxhole." Right? It's a little bit cynical, saying that when you realize that you're completely out of control, that you don't have control over your well-being, that's when it's easiest to remember that maybe perhaps there's somebody else who is in control. But when it seems like you are in control, that I'm doing well, I'm successful, that's when it's very easy to forget about God and to forget about the fact that while it seems like I'm the one who's responsible for everything that's going on in my life, there might also be somebody else who's actually pulling the strings in a way that I have forgotten. And so as the Jewish calendar goes through the agricultural cycle, it's these holidays that are important to remind us of the fact that as successful as we hope we are and we will be, ultimately it's not 100% in our control. And so we turn to God, and God, who is the source of like ethics and goodness, and so any sort of worship of God has to include being good and thinking about how we treat other people. And so these times are really important because connecting to God is also important in terms of remembering what our relationships should be with other people. And that, I think, is really the most important part of these holidays, is that Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year, insofar as that it's a way for us, and it's a way for us to remember, or to remember again, how we're supposed to relate to other people and how we're supposed to relate to God, and remember that if we're not in control, it's not a problem, because we're never in control. Okay. I'm ready to stop talking, and I'm much. I hope that there are. I'm happy to answer questions. I really hope that there are questions. because I am much more interested in what other people have to say than what I have to say. and I'm happy to take questions on the content that I just presented, but I am equally happy to take questions on any other topic having to do with Judaism. You could try something else, but I don't know if I'll be able to answer.
What's growing in the very colorful fields back there?
That is a really good question. And that's not one that I can answer. But it's pretty, isn't it?
Sukkot, did you say?
Yes.
All right, you're in there for 7 days and you eat and sleep. Does somebody bring you food or do you go out and get it? How's that work?
Okay, great question. The Sukkot, the sukkah is usually built like right next to your house. So you're going in and out of the house. A lot of people don't sleep in the sukkah. Well, most people who observe Sukkot are at least eating their meals in the sukkah, but they tend to be like the kids like to sleep in the sukkah. I like to try to sleep in the sukkah, although I'll tell you the truth. Since I've had kids, I've slept less in the sukkah. but yeah, so it's generally it's right next to your house, so it's nothing too crazy. It's like you're camping in your backyard.
My question is not about the holidays you spoke about, but rather you referenced the Bible on many occasions. And my not being Jewish, I am wondering what's the difference between the Bible that you reference as a Christian, I know what our Christian Bible is, and the Torah, which is something I've heard people talk about who are Jewish, and I wondered what the difference between those are.
Okay, that is a question that has a few different layers to the answer. So, if we're talking about the Bible, the Jewish Bible versus as opposed to the Christian one, we basically have the first half. There are so it's I think it's what you might refer to as the Old Testament, but it's the books that really go through for looking. It's the 5 books of Moses. Then there are the early prophets and the later prophets and the writings that kind of end with the book of Esther and Daniel, and Chronicles. Those are the last few. But there's also but the term Torah that you used has a few different references. So Torah in Hebrew means law. And so the first time, the first usage of that word that we find is in the 5 books of Moses, and it refers to laws, or it's also Torah Moshe is the law of Moses that it refers to, and so it could refer just to the 5 books, which it does to a certain extent. In Hebrew, there's an acronym for the Bible called Tanakh that stands for Torah, which is the first 5 books, Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and Ketuvim, which are the writings. So in that sense, Torah refers to just the first 5 books. But it could also just be a catch-all term for some sort of Jewish texts that we study and that are important to how we live our lives.
My husband recently died, and in his papers, I found this article, and it says, "Why go to synagogue once a year?" I think he may have carried it back to excuse himself for going once a year. But the author of the article, Jack Wertheimer, says some Jews only show up for high holy days. They're still getting a lot out of it. How do you feel about it?
What an easy question to answer. I think that there are definitely a significant population of Jews who don't go to synagogue at all. There's a significant population of Jews who go just once a year, or maybe we call them 3-day-a-year Jews, maybe two days for Rosh Hashanah and one for Yom Kippur. But it's very difficult. So God is the one judging, not me. So I can't really say one way or the other. But in general, the Jewish understanding for things is that each person is born into a different circumstance, so you can't use the same metric to judge everyone, right? The only thing that is true across all human beings is that we screw up. We make mistakes. And really, if you think about it, the first story in the Bible, perhaps the most famous story in the Bible, is about Adam and Eve. And what's the first thing they do? They don't listen. They don't do what they're supposed to do. And what's really, really interesting about that is, so God puts Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it's like a nice orchard, and they can eat from all the trees, whatever they want, except for that one tree. And what's the one tree they go to look for to eat from? That one. And we know that there are some interesting punishments that God gives them as a result. But what we often overlook is the fact that before God punishes Adam and Eve, he gives them an opportunity to take responsibility, and they both try to push it off. Adam blames it on Eve, Eve blames it on the snake, and that's the problem, right? It's not great to do something wrong, but what's even worse is not being held accountable, right? It's not holding yourself accountable, because when you don't hold yourself accountable, and we see the same problem in the very next story about Cain and Abel, when Cain kills his brother Abel and then also tries not to take responsibility for it. The messages of these stories is that what God wants from us is to improve and to be better people. And so if you're the kind of person who goes to synagogue every day, then great. If you're the kind of person who doesn't do that, that's also, it could be that the person who goes to synagogue once a year is doing better than the person who's going to synagogue every day because of who knows what else they're doing, right? Who knows? I can't judge. Maybe someone is supposed to be going to synagogue. Maybe he goes 15 times a year, but he should be going 75 times a year, as opposed to the person who's struggling to get there once a year. Maybe that's a bigger deal. Maybe it's more important. Maybe that's more important. Meaning the whole point of this is that we aren't. I can't judge. We can't judge, and the only thing that we can expect of anyone else, or really mostly of ourselves, is to try to do what's best and to make sure that we're constantly improving. Was that a nice way of avoiding an answer to that question? Okay.
Appreciated your comments very much. It seems to me that part of what you're expressing and part of what I know about the Jewish tradition is a lot of it can be celebrated in the home and is celebrated in the home. And in that sense, you are being a good Jew, if you're using that good in quotations, because you're celebrating in the home with Pesach or with Sukkot, building your Sukkot, your tabernacle. And for Christians, by and large, they tend to think they need to be in church together as a primary religious obligation. And I wonder if you have some comments on that.
I can only comment on what I know, and I don't know that much about Christianity, but I can speak a little bit to what the importance is of family and of attending synagogue and worshiping together. So family is definitely the bedrock of everything. If you don't have a family, if you pay attention to how the Old Testament talks about God and what God's relationship is with other people, it's always using familial relationships. Sometimes he's a king or a master, but also he is a father. Sometimes he's a mother, and sometimes he's a spouse. And what we can get from that is that these are the very basic relationships, and that our relationship with God can inform our relationships with other people, And equally as important is our relationship with other people should help inform our relationship with God. And so, to that respect, and that light, having good familial relationships is really, really important. There is also an aspect of communal worship of God. And that's interesting and I think important on a second level, which is that while it's important to kind of be serving God in every aspect of your life, when you're coming together and serving God in a large group of people, you're forced to confront the fact that there are people in the world other than you and your family, and they're different, and everyone's there together, and actually in biblical times, and that when there was a temple in Jerusalem, that was like the whole point of the temple was for there to be a centralized place that people could come to worship God, everyone together, and to help develop a sense of unity and solidarity among disparate people, and so I think that the family aspect might be primary in terms of like what needs to come first in order to build a solid foundation, but I don't think that we can discount the importance of communal worship at all.
Any other questions?
I happened to be in Israel one year with Sukkot, and there was much dancing, singing, and probably imbibing. Talk about that if you would.
Okay, Sukkot. Okay, so I mentioned that on Rosh Hashanah we like to be. It's a serious day and we like to be happy. Yom Kippur, which is like maybe the most solemn day of the year, and we're not eating or drinking, it's also considered to be a happy day because it's part of our relationship with God, and we're strengthening our relationship with God and hopefully with other people as well. And so these days are all happy. Sukkot is another level. In our liturgy, Sukkot is referred to as Zeman Simchatenu, which is the time of our rejoicing. There's definitely an emphasis on happiness. It's interesting when the Bible describes happiness, it's always in the context of celebrating it with your family and also with people who are who are disadvantaged, people who may be overlooked, who are struggling financially or something like that. That the happiness always comes along with rejoicing with all different types of people. But specifically on Sukkot, Sukkot is a holiday where we are focusing on the water supply. Like I mentioned before, Israel is completely reliant on the rain, and so there's we have a special focus when we are entering the rainy season in Israel on asking for rain, and there was a special service in the temple when the temple stood in Jerusalem, having to do with water, and there would be a whole parade and really a big party that had to do with marching down to the foot. So Jerusalem is built on a hill, and the temple is on the top of the hill, and there would be a parade out from the temple down to the foot of the hill or the small mountain that Jerusalem is on, where there is a small spring, and they would draw water from the spring, and that to be used in the special water service in the temple, and it would be a time of great festivity, and the rabbis of that time described that it was just the most happy occasion that you could ever witness, and there'd be scholars who were juggling torches and all sorts of dubiously safe things that were going on. And so the reason why you saw all of that stuff when you were in Israel on Sukkot is because they're trying to in some way carry on that tradition of having celebrations and being joyous on Sukkot.
Would you please explain meaning of minyan and how it relates to life and death?
Needing a minyan? Okay. So a minyan is really just a quorum, and the minyan is how we determine or how we kind of reach the threshold of davening or praying. Daven is the Yiddish word for prayer, of praying as a community as opposed to as a group of individuals. So a minyan is traditionally 10 people, and that is the minimum threshold for what we would call communal prayer or communal worship. And so it has so a minyan has importance across all different types of worship, including when we including in the mourning process, where at funerals we try to make sure that we have a minyan, this quorum, so that those who are bereaved may say the Kaddish prayer, which is traditionally recited by those who have lost a first-degree family relative, and it's said throughout the 1 year mourning process for a parent, or maybe a short, but throughout the entire mourning process, this Kaddish prayer is recited. Ooh, that sounds better. And I can't. What's going on? It seems like sometimes I'm going in and out. But can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. The Kaddish prayer is really, if you look about it, while we think about it as a morning prayer, it's actually the focus of the prayer is on exalting God, and it's something that we do kind of in memory of the person who is bereaved. And the best way to kind of sanctify God's name is to do it in public and with a community, and that's why we require a quorum of that minyan.
Are there any other questions? Okay, then we thank you very, very much. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry. I did not see your hand.
In the Jewish tradition versus the other Christian religion, is there a belief in waiting for another God or a son of God?
There is not that belief. We believe that there's one, like the God who created the universe that's the God that we worship. There is an idea of a Messiah, although Messiah is a somewhat transliterated word from the Hebrew term Mashiach, which literally means anointed one. So the original kings were anointed with oil. As a matter of fact, the high priests in the temple were anointed with oil, and the prophets talk about a redemption that where the Jews are led back or in some way reestablish themselves in the land of Israel with the Messiah, which is the Mashiach, who is just a descendant, or at least in some way a descendant of the house of David. That was the original house of the royal house of Israel, and it's really hard to say what that looks like practically, or what it would look like if it were to happen. I'll tell you the truth. The establishment of a state of Israel in 1948, after close to 2,000 years of being expelled, was like pretty significant. Definitely historically, but also theologically in terms of what that process would look like. But I think I'm already veering off from the question that you asked. And so we could say that we're waiting for a Messiah, but really God's waiting for us to send the Messiah. Meaning, we realize that anything that we don't have is a result of our own behavior, and that maybe the theme for today is, if we can improve and be better, then maybe the world can be a better place.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we still have hot tea and coffee if you'd like to linger and enjoy it, or if you have anything you might like to say to the rabbi. I think he'll be here for a couple of more minutes to answer any other questions, but we thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.